Isn't Comcast just the worst? They're the worst, aren't they? They come digging in your backyard to set up a cable, and in the process, they knock out your internet. So that's why you're watching on YouTube right now and not 110sportsmedia.com/live, because we weren't able to stream this show live today, which is unfortunate. It's really tough. I was excited about today's show. Had a really great guest coming on, and he'll still be coming on. It's actually an interview that was recorded yesterday for this Friday show. So I will look different, have different clothes on, but it's a great interview with Lukas Harkins from HeatCheck College Basketball, Butler credentialed media member. And just a really great basketball mind, from bracketology to recruiting and everywhere in between. So I'm really excited about that. But let me set the agenda around that today. Like I said, Lukas coming in the second segment. I'm really excited about that for sure. Segment 3, we talked to Lukas a little bit about the 100 greatest college basketball players of the decade list that is coming out over the next couple weeks on 110sportsmedia.com. This week, 100 through 71 were unveiled. So we talked to him about that. We talked about the formula a little bit, and if he has any major issues with how the list was put together. So I sort of extend that conversation into segment 3 to talk about my thoughts on our formula, my thoughts on the way the list turned out, and some of the misses of the formula, but also some of the hits. So. And then we'll get out here with FYI per usual, and we'll call it a day. But I'm excited for the show. I want to start with the PGA Tour, though. I know, PGA Tour, what are you talking about? I know. Trust me, I know. But the PGA Tour is approaching positive COVID-19 cases, I think, in a really good way, and the players themselves are approaching it in a really good way as well. And I think there are things that other leagues in this country coming back can take from to really help with the controlling and just the understanding and approaching of coronavirus and the inevitability of positive tests in leagues. So the first week of the PGA Tour was at the Charles Schwab Challenge in Fort Worth, Texas, and at Colonial, and there were 0 positive tests. All week, no positive tests. Great. It's a perfect start. It was a dream start, actually, because to not have anybody in the field test positive is absolutely a dream start. Week number 2, the RBC Heritage. You had one player, Nick Watney, from the PGA Tour professional, test positive for coronavirus. So he withdrew, as is the standard for the PGA Tour. And now if you test positive for coronavirus, you are required to withdraw from the current tournament. So that happened at the RBC Heritage. Nothing else happened. Webb Simpson won that tournament, and all things considered, one positive test in two weeks, especially for a PGA Tour that is traveling, is a good thing. And then you get to this week, and they're in Cromwell, Connecticut, for the Travelers Championship. And the Travelers Championship, it's one of those events that it's absolutely adored around Connecticut. It's been around for a really long time. I think this year is the 69th Travelers Championship. And here's where I really want to talk about how I'm proud of how the PGA Tour has done this. And I think that how they're approaching it and how their players are approaching it is something that can be really valued around leagues, even though I understand it's the PGA Tour and the individual nature of golf is not the same as baseball, basketball, etc., those team sports. So I understand that, but I think there's just a principle of the thing that can be commented on from the way that the PGA Tour has been approaching these things. So first, only one player so far, and there have been reports this morning that 2 more players, at least one more player, has tested positive for coronavirus. So as those reports come, this will change a little bit. But only one player so far has actually tested positive for coronavirus at the Travelers, and that's Cameron Champ, 2-time PGA Tour winner, a young guy on tour. But he tested positive for COVID-19, so he withdrew from the tournament. He's so far the only player who actually tested positive for COVID-19. But 5 total players have withdrawn from the tournament. And let me lay out for you who and why. So far, Brooks Koepka, his brother Chase Koepka, Graham McDowell, and Webb Simpson have all withdrawn for the Travelers Championship, from the Travelers Championship. Brooks Koepka's caddy tested positive, and even though Brooks has not tested positive, or Chase, his brother, who has actually Monday qualified for the Travelers Championship. If you don't know how the PGA Tour works, every Monday on the PGA Tour there's a qualifier, a Monday qualifier, and essentially one guy from the Monday qualifier gets into the tournament. So, these are professionals still trying to make their way in the game, trying to get on the Web.com tour, Korn Ferry Tour, many tour guys who, play tournaments in between trying to Monday qualify for the PGA Tour events because, of course, there in the Korn Ferry Tour is where you're making real money that, you win one tournament, you place really well twice, and you're set for a while. And, on the Korn Ferry Tour, you can pay your bills for several months. And on the PGA Tour, you win once, and it's, even for the lower tournaments, it's $625,000 check. So Chase Koepka, it's incredibly hard to qualify for a PGA Tour event through a Monday qualifier because there are touring professionals who have lost some of their status on the PGA Tour who are playing in these, and those are obviously the best of the best golfers in the world. So it's tough. And Monday qualifying is something to be extremely proud of. And Chase Koepka did it, but he's decided, along with Brooks, because they've been around Brooks's caddy, who tested positive, to for the safety of the rest of the players in the field, the staff at the golf course they're playing at this week, as well as the PGA staff and broadcast staff around the golf course. They've also decided, those two players have decided to withdraw. Graham McDowell's caddy also tested positive. Graham McDowell did not test positive, but he withdrew as well for those same precautionary reasons. And Webb Simpson actually had a family member test positive for COVID-19, so he withdrew as well. So one player who's actually playing golf in the field this week, or was supposed to, said, I'm going to take a step back, I'm not going to play in this tournament, for actually testing positive for COVID-19. The other four are for precautionary reasons. Still COVID-19 related, but precautionary without a positive test like that. I think this is really important. First, there are a couple things that other leagues and players can take into note. First, we are all in this together. And I think the PGA Tour players are really understanding this. We're all in this together. So even if you haven't tested positive, and so you don't technically have to withdraw from a tournament yet, you're around somebody who has, and it makes sense that you might contract the illness. So you isolate for a few days, you miss this tournament, but if it comes to be shown that you didn't test positive, then you can come back the next week. Maybe it's with a different caddy for a couple weeks as your normal one recovers and tests negative a couple times and so on and so forth. But you've saved, you're playing with two other guys every day. It's the same two guys for the first two rounds, but it's unlikely, at least not overwhelmingly likely, that you'll play with the same guys on Saturday and Sunday. You'll probably have two different guys on Saturday and Sunday. They each have a caddy. So that's 8 to 10 people who are also around 8 to 10 people, and so on and so forth throughout the week. And that's how things can spread, even if you haven't tested positive yet. We're all in this together. I mean, all of us in the world, which is why it's ridiculous that people still can't figure out to wear their mask when they're in public, because this isn't about you or me. It's about us, and it's about this country getting through this together. And it's about these leagues getting through it together and their players getting through it together. And the PGA Tour players seem to have that in mind. So take that into account. NBA, Major League Baseball players, if you know you came into contact with somebody who contracted COVID-19, especially if you don't test positive. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that, okay, LeBron, you should sit out because you know you came into contact with somebody right before Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals. I recognize, I'm not naive. I know that's not going to happen if LeBron didn't actually test positive for COVID-19. I understand that. So that's not really what I'm getting at. But if you know you came in contact and your next game isn't for a couple days, quarantine. Say, okay, I'm going to go into isolation for a couple days, because if you've contracted it from this person, you're probably going to get a positive test result in the next couple of days. The symptoms don't come for a couple weeks, but it's my understanding that you can test positive much sooner than that. So just quarantine for a couple days as long as you can, get a couple tests done, so that if it did happen, then you've caught it early and maybe you haven't given it to anybody else. And if not, you're good to go. And that's what's going to happen with Brooks and Chase and Webb and Graham. They're going to get tested a couple more times, and if we get through Sunday, the end of this tournament, and they haven't tested positive and they're not near their caddies or their family members that have tested positive for COVID-19, then they should be fine. They should be able to move on to the next tournament. And that's how, from a player perspective, the leagues have to put in these measures to stop outbreaks as much as possible. But it also falls on the players, just like it falls on us as normal citizens, to do what we can to make sure that this doesn't spread as much as it could, and to try and keep this under wraps. This is incredibly valuable, in my opinion, to look at this and just understand from a player's perspective. Let's be all in this together, and let's take, even if it's, quote unquote, taking one. I mean, Chase Koepka took one for the team. I mean, anybody who understands, I touched on this a little bit already, but anybody who knows golf knows how impossible it is to Monday qualify for an event. It's impossible. You can go out, shoot 64, 8 under, and still not qualify for the event, because the guys are that good. It's a big deal to Monday qualify, and shout out to the Travelers for ensuring Chase Koepka a spot in the field next season at the 2021 Travelers Championship. I think that's really awesome, and shows that the Travelers Championship is also all in this together. Number 2, so that's from a player's perspective. Number 2, the commissioners and league leaders of these other leagues can see what Jay Monahan did. Jay Monahan, the commissioner of the PGA Tour. I'm not going to sit here and act like there's not a chance that there will be a massive outbreak on the PGA Tour and they have to shut down the tour for a couple weeks, or they just decide this isn't worth it and we shut it down. Like that could happen, and it's impossible to really have a bubble on the PGA Tour because they're moving from city to city. It's just impossible to really make it as safe as you can for the NBA. The only thing working for the PGA Tour is that it's a completely contact-free sport. You don't have to touch anybody the entire time, and caddies are grabbing the poles with baby wipes and sterilizing wipes on their hands. So they grab the flag stick, pull it out, and they never actually touch the flag stick. Wipe it down when they're done. So it's of course working in their favor that it's not out of the realm of possibility for one guy to get it and to not give it to anybody else if people are maintaining those social distancing rules. But Jay Monahan, the commissioner of the PGA Tour, didn't freak out about these positive cases. I don't think Rob Manfred will freak out, and I don't think that Adam Silver will either. But it's still worth mentioning that Jay Monahan, he got out in front of it quickly. Travelers Championship, right after these guys were withdrawing from the tournament, he said, let's do a press conference. He said, we're going to look at our health and safety measures again. We're going to make sure that all of our players are following it to the best of their ability, doing the things that we're asking them to do, and we're going to update this and make sure that we're doing the most that we can to stop the spread of this. Because that's the approach that leagues and teams and players are going to have if these things are actually going to happen. If these, they're going to be positive cases, and if we want seasons to actually finish, this is the approach that we're going to actually need to see from players, commissioners, and teams. No freaking out, making sure everything can be done that can possibly be done to make sure that the measures, to make sure that the outbreak doesn't happen. Because and I will talk for 30 seconds about this because I've talked in the open of both shows this week about this. because this is going to happen in every league. We're already seeing it in the NBA. We've already seen it in Major League Baseball. We're seeing it in golf now. It's going to happen. And we have to, the mindset has to be right to fight it, to make sure it's not spreading, rather than freaking out about this if we actually want these cases to be not overwhelming and to actually get these seasons played. With that being said, though, easily the worst day in the Orlando area for positive coronavirus cases. Shouts to Keith Smith, NBA. Orange County today, Friday, June 26th. 1,051 total positives. Positives, not cases. I mean, not tests. Positives. To give you a frame of reference, me here in Memphis, Tennessee, yesterday, I think there were, there's in this sort of uptick, there's been roughly 100 new cases, something like that. Out of like 2,500 total tests done most days. That's usually what I'm seeing. And I can look that up as well to see what actually is going on in Memphis today. But 1,051 total cases, 17.9 positivity. Almost one in every 5 people, 1 in every 6 testing positive for coronavirus that are getting tested. And that's with considering, the CDC came out with a new sort of expanded guidelines for people at risk and said, we're at the numbers that we are in this country, but it's likely that the majority of the cases in this country haven't been tested. They didn't feel bad, or they just, they decided that this might be what they have. They go into isolation, they feel better, and then they move on, or didn't realize it was coronavirus because their symptoms weren't exactly the way that they said their symptoms were going to be. So they were never tested. They were never seen as positive, and they just sort of got through it and moved on, because that's happening a lot. And then even more so, there's a lot of people who aren't seeing symptoms, which is part of why this is so dangerous. That's not good for Florida, not good for Orlando, not good for where the NBA is trying to return. And if this continues to happen, every day this continues to happen, we're going to have to ask ourselves the questions again. Is this really smart still? And I guess there's an argument that this was never smart. But is this a calculated risk, and one that we feel like we can control? Because it just doesn't exactly pass the out loud test that if Orlando isn't controlling it, that something happening in Orlando can really be defined as being controlled. But we'll see. But I wanted to shout out the PGA Tour. We'll see what happens with any more positive cases this week, see how many they actually end up with as we move forward in this week at the Travelers Championship. But I was encouraged by that, and I think they're doing a pretty good job approaching it the way that they have, at least through the first 3 weeks of the return of the PGA Tour. But coming up next, Lukas Harkins, HeatCheck College Basketball at Hardwired Sports on Twitter. Good friend of mine. I'm really excited to chat with him for a few minutes. This interview was actually recorded yesterday, so I'm going to have different clothes on, but we'll just cut straight to that out of the break. We'll talk to Lukas for a little while, and then we'll come back with segment 3 to expand on the 100 college basketball players list, and then FYI and get out of here. But I'm excited for that interview. You're watching the JMULL Show, not on 110sportsmedia.com, but on our YouTube channel and over on the website, having previously recorded this. But you're watching the JMULL Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the JMULL show. Today, we have the prestigious honor of talking to Heat Check College Basketball's national writer, their bracketologist, recruiting analyst, and a credentialed media member for the Butler Bulldogs. It's Lukas Harkins from Heat Check at Hardwired Sports on Twitter. Lucas, how you doing?
Good. How about you, Josh?
I'm doing well. Appreciate you taking the time to come and chat some hoops with me for a few minutes. I want to start with the thing that is probably one of the biggest stories in college basketball this week, and that's Cade Cunningham coming back to Oklahoma State. Were you surprised that he decided to stay loyal to Mike Boynton, or did you think he might lean that way when you saw Oklahoma State's postseason ban?
Well, I think the thing with him is the family relationship and dynamic at Oklahoma State for Cade Cunningham. Mm-hmm. And really, honestly, choosing as the number one player in the country to go play at Oklahoma State in the first place isn't exactly, no offense to Oklahoma State, but it's been 20 years. Mm-hmm. Isn't exactly your pick if you want to win the national championship. So I think that decision in the first place was rather family-oriented, and there's nothing wrong with that, of course. And while the potential postseason ban changes the future of the postseason for next season for his only college season, it doesn't change the fact that he still has that same relationship on staff. Mm-hmm. So I think it wasn't a huge surprise to me, and I think most people thought he was going to end up staying as well. But obviously, it's certainly a talking point. Mm-hmm.
Would you have been more surprised if he chose a different school to go to, or more surprised if he just decided to forego college basketball altogether?
I think it would have been a bigger surprise to me if he chose a different school.
I would agree. Yeah, I felt like there was certainly that connection there, and like you said, there's no reason to go to Oklahoma State other than a deeper connection with a coach and the familial connection, because you can't twist it to make yourself believe that you're actually going to be a favorite to win the national championship when going to a school like that.
At least not a school, because at least Oklahoma State has a really good tradition of winning. It's just not in recent memory or under this staff. So,
right. So you spend a lot of time, sifting through recruiting lists, team rankings, player rankings, and you and I having some good laughs before we came onto the show here. But it's a little harder to recruit nowadays, of course, without being able to bring guys to campus or make home visits or be in gyms with those guys, over the summer during the viewing period and going to Peach Jam and those kind of events. Which schools, which programs are doing a good job recruiting over this past spring and now into the summer, despite those difficulties that nobody saw coming?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's viable to really say anyone's doing that much better than anyone right now. It's because everyone's under the same circumstances. It's more the programs that were really ahead of the game already. Mm-hmm. That have that edge, the ones that were already able to snag the commitments that they wanted earlier. So to me, that's like the USC's, Wisconsin, Butler, all three programs already were off to strong starts in 2021, in the class of 2021, and also had already finished up pretty good 2020 classes early too. Both Butler and Wisconsin have five-man 2020 classes with multiple top 200 players, and all of those guys were signed already by the fall, which allowed them to get going on 2021 early, and Butler has 2 commits and Wisconsin has 3 already. So I think it's more the programs that were ahead of the game and have already kind of narrowed their focuses for either their last 1 or 2 scholarships in that class. And of course, recently Louisville has been kind of on a tear. They picked up a commit, Bryce Hopkins, last fall, and then Bobby Pettiford pretty recently, and then L. Ellis, the JUCO transfer, committed yesterday or 2 days ago, depending on when this comes out. So I guess they're probably the one that's probably done the best job during quarantine. I would give that edge to Louisville, but really it's just everyone's dealing with the same situation, not being able, and it's so difficult for really evaluating prospects when they're not able to play against each other like they would in a shoe circuit.
Right, definitely. I think, of course, setting yourself up for success ahead of time and getting out onto the recruiting trail and really getting some momentum early is always helpful, but it happened to be way more helpful than it usually is because of the current circumstances. Let's talk about Butler a little bit. Butler undoubtedly is going to be, it's Butler, so they're underrated every season. And then you lose your best player in Kamar Baldwin, and so they're going to be underrated by everybody again. How does Butler change next season from a play style, from a who's carrying the load of the scoring? How does Butler change next year, and do you think they're going to be all that much worse from a conference wins perspective and from just a success next season perspective, or are you expecting them to do what they do pretty much every year and take people by surprise?
I would say it's not really taking people by surprise. I think kind of going into the year, everyone will be hesitant to believe in Butler, and I think that's reasonable. And being truly optimistic by thinking, for anyone thinking that Butler will be a top half team going into the year is probably, I think that would almost be an insult to what Kamar Baldwin did for Butler basketball. Mm-hmm. And Sean McDermott for that matter as well. I mean, those two guys both were huge impact players over their careers, and expecting that Butler, a team that finished 10-8 last year in the conference, isn't going to take a step back to winning. Going to take at least some step back, I think it would be a mistake. I would say Butler's probably in what I view to be a huge middle tier of the Big East after Villanova and Creighton at the top. But I think Butler would probably more towards the 7 to 9 range. I think comfortably ahead, at least in my opinion, of DePaul and Georgetown at the end. Mm-hmm. But in that same kind of group with the Xavier, Marquette, St. John's in the maybe 5 to 9.
How do you feel about the recruiting class just sort of taking it out of, not out of context necessarily with what they can bring to the team, but how do you feel about that 2020 recruiting class that's coming in for Coach Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's one of the best classes in program history on paper. I mean, it's unlikely to match the Gordon Hayward, Shelvin Mack class, but just on paper with recruiting ranking coming again, it's one of, if not the best recruiting classes that a Butler coaching staff has ever landed. And there's a good variety of talent in the group too, with Scooby Johnson out of Michigan being one of the best kind of all-around prospects at small forward. He can shoot it from deep, attacks well. He's a good passer, good defender. It's hard to find a true flaw in his game, and I think that's why we'll probably see him starting as a freshman. And then two guards, both Chuck Harris and Miles Tate, hovering around top 150 in the class. Both can play the one or the two. They're true combos. I really like Chuck Harris's ability to get downhill in the pick and roll. Does a really nice job finding his teammates out of that, can score. He's improved as a shooter in the past year, and I think that'll be important. As for Miles Tate, he's a rather different player. He's more he's a really quick ball handler, has a nice step back jumper. Is one of the most successful high school basketball players of the last few years at Dorman. He's been outstanding. And then Jacoby Coles is kind of that 6'7", undersized power forward that just kind of gets things done. And while he might not be a star as a freshman, I think it's reasonable to think that he will play just because, even if he's not in a huge role. I mean, he got to play with, I think, Cade Cunningham and Greg Brown, both top 10 players in the 2020 class for his AAU team last season. So he's accustomed to kind of just doing what his team needs him to do. And he runs the floor pretty well for his size. He can stretch the floor with a three-point shot. He's a good passer. Kind of exactly the kind of versatility from the four spot that Coach Jordan is looking for. And then Miles Wilmoth is the lowest rated player in the class, sitting outside of the top 200. but long, lanky, DJ Wilson type build coming into college. And while it's maybe unlikely he reaches that kind of ceiling as a future NBA player, that he's got a tantalizing ceiling with his athleticism at his size and his ability to both wreak havoc on the boards and stretch the floor as playing almost as a 6'9" wing.
You think this is the type of recruiting class that Coach Jordan's going to be able to bring in every year? Like, over the last 5 years or so, Butler recruiting classes continue to get better every year from a, as you said, on paper perspective. Is this the kind of thing that you expect Jordan to be, as long as the success stays at a relatively similar level, the kind of class that he can bring in every year? Or is this a special case with the volume and also the quality of player that he was able to bring in?
Yeah, I don't think, at least I would say the staff probably isn't feeling like a 5-man recruiting class every year is really in the plans.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That would require some transfer exoduses, or at least a bunch of players going pro, which I don't anticipate. So I think this class and the next class, which currently has a pair of commits, I think there's a legitimate chance that Butler has 9 underclassmen on the 2021-22 roster, and I don't think that that's going to be something that we grow accustomed to seeing. Mm-hmm. But I think consistently landing top 150 players, 2 or 3 a class, isn't that out of the realm possibility. And as Laval shows more of his recruiting prowess, along with the rest of the staff, and if they continue to have seasons like this past one, which was one of the better regular seasons Butler has ever had as a program, landing was likely to receive a 4 or 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. If they continue to have that kind of success on the court, in addition to their ability to build relationships and stay ahead of the game, which I mentioned earlier, they've done really well with building their classes early. I don't see a reason why their classes can't be top 100 talents, 2 or 3 a year.
Yeah, absolutely. So they've got, in the 2021 class, they've got a pair of guys that are from Central Indiana, and I've heard, at least I've seen on Twitter, that you're a big fan of Pierce Thomas out of Brownsburg. Why do you like him so much, and what's so attractive about him?
Well, he's an unbelievable athlete. One of the best long jumpers of his age in the country, and part of that is he spent so much time working on track and field, and now that he's kind of dedicated to basketball as his future in college, it's intriguing to see how his skill level can develop off of that. He played mostly point guard this past year for Brownsburg. He's a really good playmaker, has a pretty nice pull-up 3, but still needs to improve as a shooter. But he plays above the rim, 6'5", long, has really put on weight to be stronger. At the 3, he looks just kind of like that guy that Butler's kind of been missing for the past few years, that uber-athletic wing that you can run on back cuts. He can shoot 3, or at least should continue to develop in that area. He's got an unbelievably high ceiling if he reaches his full potential.
So before I let you go here, we at 110 Sports have created a greatest 100 college basketball players of the last decade. Have you gotten a chance to look at it? If not, I will run through the first 20 that we've released and see if you've got any major issues. But if you have gotten a chance to look, we can just dive right into it.
No, I have taken an early look at it. I've looked at the first 20 you guys have released. Yeah.
So how do you? So this is, for the people who don't know, this is a list that's completely based on a formula. So it's not. So we tried to take as much bias out of it as possible, which is, for the most part, I think something we've done successfully in terms of making a list that actually makes sense. But then you have, some guys that just are way farther down on the list than even I feel like they should be. Players like Javon Carter and Marcus Smart would be higher on my list than 95th and 96th, which is where they currently sit on our list. From what you've looked at, any major issues with our formula here? Did we get any that you're just like, that's just completely wrong? Or do we at least look semi-complacent with what we've got so far? Or not semi-complacent, semi-competent with what we have so far?
I think my biggest issue with the formula is, as much as I love mid-major basketball, it's too much of an emphasis on being able to score points from the mid-major level. Just because there are a lot of, even just playing for a good team, that there aren't that many teams that make the Final Four. So right now it's 2 points for an NCAA tournament appearance, but there's a lot of teams that make the tournament and then reach the Elite Eight that don't get a bonus for doing stuff like that. It pains me to say it, like a Xavier Elite Eight team, or even Gonzaga, who's made the Sweet 16 5 straight years or something. Those guys don't get those kind of extra points.
Yeah.
So I think it's something like that I think is my biggest issue with it. It's just a little bit too much of an emphasis towards mid-major talent, and we'll see how that affects the list as you get into the top 80.
What we found was that, and if we could go back and do it again, I'd probably add some emphasis for, and even if it's just NCAA tournament wins, every time you win an NCAA tournament game, you get another point or something like that, and then you have your final 4 points, something to that effect. But as we get lower on the list, and as these stories start to come out on our website, the sort of the mid-major guys who were just really good, who were just really solid on really good dominant stretches for their programs, start to dwindle out, and you won't see quite as many cases of that, if any, at least not any like Nana Fallon, who is inside the top 100. But you'll see the guys who were absolutely elite, like your Doug McDermott's, who spent the majority of his career in a mid-major, but was just far and away the best player in the country for several years. So I think it'll balance itself out a little bit, but at least at the back half of the list, we've definitely got some mid-major influence here that was a little more than I would have liked to see.
And I will certainly agree with your other Josh. And as I quote him, this is the first time I feel our formula failed in a significant way, as it pertains to Nick Stauskas at 86. I'd even go with it. Like a few names on here that have already kind of come up, I might just go higher. Maybe it's just my own memory of him. But Nate Walters, it's tough. I might even give extra points in a formula for a mid-major All-American. He was so good that season that I think that maybe that's the kind of bonus I might give for someone of his caliber, just from a mid-major, to get that kind of national recognition.
Which is also completely fair. Okay, how do you feel about Karl Anthony Towns at 88?
Well, he's tricky, just because that whole team was tricky. I want to say he played 20 minutes a game during his season, and that's tough to manage in a formula set, because you can't really quantify his impact. Which in a formula, you're quantifying how they where they rank among the greatest players. And I don't really know if that's. I don't think it's necessarily a fair ranking, but I don't know if there's a way to really improve on that either, because that team and a few Kentucky teams are just so interesting in their unbelievable depth and almost platoon format at times with how Coach Cal used his players. So I don't really know if I definitely disagree with his placement, but I'm not sure how you can fix the formula in that way.
Yeah, I suppose the only way to get him more points, to make it a little more accurate, would be adding some sort of points for each individual NCAA tournament game he won, because of course he won all of them except the last one, and of course if he'd have won that one, he'd have 8 more points to his name, have 34 points, and be somewhere in the mid 50s. I realized when looking at him is that it's just, and part of what you said is because of how deep that particular Kentucky team was, and how the John Calipari put those lineups together, is that he just looks incredibly underwhelming, and then it turns into a guy who was a one and done, who didn't win a national championship, and that in and of itself doesn't 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 exactly mean greatness, but it's certainly a little lower. I was just wondering what you thought of that, because I think there's definitely some disagreement among us about where he should go, or how unfair that ranking might be.
Yeah, like I might even, like, you guys give points for regular season title and conference tournament title.
Mm-hmm.
I might even add a section that's like top 10 Ken Pom finish to the mix, because that's really the only way you can. That's really the only ranking system that goes 1 to 353 that you can kind of look back on and is nationally respected from that point of view. Because if you look at that Kentucky team, I mean, their adjusted efficiency margin from that year was 3 whole points higher than the second best team. And that kind of unbelievable dominance, because starting 38-0 is not something that is really recognized in your formula. Besides, well, they'd win the regular season title if they went 30-8, and probably the conference tournament title too, and get an NCAA tournament appearance. So like that kind of dominance, or the Virginia and Villanova dominances of the past couple years. I mean, Virginia 35-3, Villanova went. Even Gonzaga's had a couple seasons that are that outrageous from an efficiency standpoint that kind of deserve that kind of credit. So maybe that would be something I would have added to it. Obviously, there's no system that'll be perfect, and the more stuff you add onto it, the more difficult, the more issues you'll find.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. I think the hesitancy there was, I mean, I personally have an issue with giving Gonzaga too much credit for going, 38-2 when they play in the WCC and have to beat San Francisco twice in a conference. But so, there are certainly times where guys probably don't get some of the recognition, but it's at the expense of not wanting to give a mid-major team too much credit for going 38-0 and.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned the efficiency margin difference, because there are teams, obviously, that have been outstanding efficiently that have great records in the mid-majors. But then there's the teams like, just recent example, East Tennessee State went 30-4 this year, but was still not a top 50 team in the country by a Ken Pom standard. So I think more of an efficiency point there would come across.
For sure. Well, I'm glad. I appreciate you giving your insight there. Lucas, thank you so much for stopping by to chat some college hoops. It's always a pleasure.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Lucas, buddy, thank you so much for coming onto the show and talking some hoops with me. Really enjoy talking to Lucas. He's one of the better basketball minds that I've ever had the privilege of knowing and discussing college hoops with. So if you haven't followed him on Twitter, you should. It's a must follow at Hardwired Sports on Twitter. He just switched over from Busting Brackets to HeatCheck College Basketball. They're also on Twitter at HeatCheckCBB. So they're fantastic. Go over there and check out what they have on that site and what he's writing about Butler and about the country. It's really spectacular. But coming up next, we're going to expand on 100 college basketball players list, like I said that we would, and then do FYI before we get out of here. You're watching the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on this Friday afternoon. We did it. We did the first week of 110 Sports Media. The launch was a success as far as I'm concerned. I'm really excited to keep growing this brand that we've started, and I really appreciate anybody who stopped by to watch this show and our other shows on 110 Sports Live over the last week. We got another show coming. Chris Brown, who I've had on the show a couple times this week. Baseball is back, so Chris is going to start his show in the next couple weeks. Really excited about that. And then, of course, we got Touchline Talk with Josh Doring on 110 Sports Live as well. It's been a really fun week, and I'm excited to keep it moving. But part of our launch has been the 100 greatest college basketball players of the decade. And I want to get something out of the way before we move into this list that you see on the right side of our screen. The first 30 were released this week. We're doing stories with 10 each, as we've got some commentary about each of them, and it helps us space out the content a little bit. So this is the first 30 that you see. It's released 3 times a week, and this is 100 through 71. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, talk about our list, for those who don't know and who haven't read the story, it's completely based on formula. We talked about this with Lucas a little bit. So there's a point system, a point value system, to try and take out as much bias as possible. Things like points, like individual statistics per game, and then you've got team success, like regular season conference titles, conference tournament titles, NCAA tournament appearances, Final Fours, national championships, national player of the years, first team, second team, third team All-American, conference player of the year awards, so on and so forth, to try to assign a point total to each player. And we started with the base criteria being first team All-American in your conference. We figured that would get everybody under the umbrella. Every national player of the year is going to be on a first team All-Conference. Every All-American is going to be a first-team All-Conference. Every player of the year is going to be first-team All-Conference. And then that allows players to not get players who weren't all that great, just were bench role pieces on national championship teams, to not sneak into the top 100 just because a Villanova player was on the bench for both in national championship runs, etc. So first-team All-Conference at least once was the base criteria. 1,351 players actually met that criteria, and we whittled it down to the point where 100 were standing. As you can see on the right side of the screen, this is our bottom 30 on the list: Monte, Yogi Ferrell, Kyle Anderson, Jeremy Lamb, Marcus Smart, Javon Carter, Jawan Johnson, Nana Fallon, Damon Brooks from Davidson, Tyshawn Taylor, Joe Jackson, Marcus Morris, Carl Anthony Towns. We'll get to him in a second. Nate Walters, Nick Stauskas, Kenneth Fareed, Julian Boyd, Jamal Olaseri, Marcus Page, Nigel Williams-Goss, Melvin Edgem, J.J. Mann, Tyler Kalinowski, Zach Thomas, Daniel Mullings, Kelly Olenek, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, C.J. Fair, Caleb Swanigan, and Ethan Happ. So first of all, I want to go to bat for our formula for a second, because I really am proud of the formula that we came up with, the formula that we sort of established for this list, because I think it creates a list that is a little bit different from any list you're ever going to see, because it's not the 100 best. It's the 100 greatest, which there's a difference. Now, a lot of times, is there such thing? It's kind of a rectangle and a square thing. Not every awesome college basketball player is one of the greatest, but pretty much every greatest one is going to be one of the best. So it takes into account really high level players, but also players who achieved winning at the highest level of the sport, which is what we wanted to do. And as a result, the guy who's first on this list, who will be, I think we're still a week and a half out from that player, from that 10-1 list being published at 110sportsmedia.com. But I don't think anybody's going to have a problem with that guy. And for the most part, nobody's going to have any issues with the top 50, because what you see in this section of the list is you see a lot of mid-majors that were a part of what we've deemed the perennial winners club, who just won at a ridiculous level in a mid-major conference. You see in the mid-70s there, you've got Zach Thomas, Tyler Kalinowski, J.J. Mann. and JMULL and Julian, who both went to LIU Brooklyn, there in the mid 80s. In the mid 80s on the list, not in the mid 80s, not in the mid 1980s. But you see these mid-major guys who got in the back half of this list because they were just elite winners. And Lucas and I talked about this a little bit, and I think there could have been a little bit of an adjustment for point totals, individual statistics in mid-major levels, but I still have no problem. And we did account for mid-major conference titles. So it's 3 points to win a regular season title in a major conference. It's only 2 in a mid-major conference. And then a conference tournament title at a major conference is 2 points, and a mid-major conference title championship is just 1. But with every 1 point that a mid-major got, they got the 2 points. Like, it really was a 3-point swing kind of thing. Of course, that's how it always operates, but you're getting extra points. You're essentially getting extra points because that's the only way that these mid-major schools were going to get into the tournament. But I think, we wanted a list that accurately represented mid-majors. Does that make sense? And as we get down on the list, I mean, you're going to see guys really high up there, like your Doug McDermott's of the world and your Mike Doms of the world, who are both in the top 5, top 10 in scoring in NCAA history, and they both did ridiculous things in their individual conferences and individually just across the country. So you're going to get those guys. Doug McDermott, of course, spent 1 year in the Big East, but most of it was in the Missouri Valley Conference, where Creighton was prior to joining the Big East. So you're going to see those, but as we get further and further down the list, closer to number 1, you're going to see that it's a lot of guys in major conferences that would also be towards the top of a best players of the decade list, but it is a little different because we wanted to reward winning, and there were some ways that we could reward winning a little more and get players like Karl Anthony Towns, who, as Lucas mentioned, was an incredible player. And this is not me saying that he wasn't, but our formula, because he's just not all that spectacular from a statistics standpoint, just because of how Calipari ran that team that year, and he didn't win a national championship, he missed out on a lot of points, and he also missed out on being a first-team All-American, basically because his team was so good. He was a second-team All-American, averaging 10-6, so that gives you an idea of how people felt about him. No other second-team All-American is going to have numbers that look like that, but he did and still was a second-team All-American because people understood how good he was. And if I could go back and do it again, there would be some sort of reward for just NCAA tournament wins. Maybe it's 1 point for every win. I don't have an issue with that. Maybe it's 1 point every time you get past a weekend. So if you get through the round of 32, you make it through that weekend, you get a point. If you make it through, and then maybe if you make a Sweet 16, so if you make a Sweet 16, that's a point. If you make an Elite 8, that's another point, and then you get your 4 points for making the Final Four. Something to that effect, just to boost some players like Karl Anthony Towns, who, Lucas was right, is not getting a whole lot of credit for being on a team that was undefeated going into the Final Four. With that being said, I think Karl Anthony Towns, in terms of, but at the end of the day, it's not. Karl Anthony Towns would have had better statistics if it was a different Kentucky team. It was this Kentucky team. It was the statistics that he had, and it is ultimately a one-and-done player who was really good because he wasn't transcending the game for Kentucky that year. He was just really good, and you knew that he was going to be good in the NBA, especially with the expanded game that he now has, that he didn't have at Kentucky. But with that being said, it still wasn't all that spectacular from an individual perspective. So he certainly would have been higher. And then, of course, the other one that really I wish was a little higher is Javon Carter, the West Virginia guard, who is the best perimeter defender of the decade, in my opinion, is the reason that West Virginia's press was so awesome for 4 years, and the reason that it was not awesome after he left, and the reason that West Virginia and Bob Huggins really changed the way that they played with guards like Jordan McCabe in their backcourt, who were just not the physical prowess and physical defenders that Javon Carter was. but he played in the Big 12, and so he never won a Big 12 regular season, and he never won a Big 12 title. And even a player who's so good on a West Virginia team that was really good, specifically his last 2 years, didn't get some of that credit there because they were in a Kansas-dominated conference. But I'm really excited about this list coming out. I think we were proud of the list we came up with at the end. I think it makes sense for the most part, and it's different in the way that we wanted it to be different. And it's going to make people mad in a way that we wanted people to be mad, because it's just different. It's going to have players in a place that people don't think those players should be. But keep an eye out on 110sportsmedia.com as this countdown continues to happen over the next couple weeks. But once again, thanks to Lukas for coming to talk about this list, some recruiting, some Butler basketball, and this list. And we'll continue to push those out over the next couple weeks. But we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, it's FYI to wrap up the show. You're watching the JMULL show on 110sportsmedia.com. We're back on the JMULL show to wrap up on this Friday, end of the week, working towards the weekend, all of those cliches. Thank you so much for joining us here on YouTube today, actually, because connection issues around these parts prohibiting us from doing this on Twitch, doing it live. So anybody watching on YouTube, really appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe to that YouTube channel below. Follow 110 Sports on Twitter, and check out 110sportsmedia.com, all of those great things. But got a couple FYIs before we get out of here for your information. Things you should just know. I just need you to know them before we get out of here and move towards the weekend. Number one, Comcast makes me sad. They make me sad because I wasn't able to do this show live today. So I'm a little sad, and they're the reason for that sadness. So I needed you to know. I need you to know that Comcast makes me sad. Number two, and more the serious ones here, or more official FYIs. FYI number two, the NWSL Challenge Cup starts tomorrow, June 27th. NWSL, of course, the highest level of women's soccer in this country, is returning tomorrow, and you should head over to yesterday, June 25th's version of Touchline Talk with Josh Doring to get a full preview of the NWSL Challenge Cup. Admittedly, I'm not going to be the one that you need to come to ask about that, but Josh absolutely is. So head over there to check that out. And if you're looking for some live sports, more live sports coming tomorrow in the form of the NWSL Challenge Cup. So check that one out as well. And then finally, just saw this on Twitter during the break. According to Woj, 16 of the 302 NBA players have tested positive for the coronavirus. Honestly, that's not as many as I thought it would be. It really wasn't. And if that's the kind of numbers we're talking about, especially if we can get everyone to Orlando without getting it, then I think this might could happen for the NBA. I think that's an encouraging number, because I didn't think it was out of the realm of possibility for 60 players to have coronavirus. So you isolate those 16, you get them healthy before teams head to Orlando in the 10 days into July, and if you can get everybody there and they're healthy, then I think then you're really looking at something that's controllable. Even in Orlando, where I was talking about the beginning of the show, is definitely having trouble controlling the outbreak and the resurgence of COVID-19 in Florida and specifically in Orlando. So if they can keep that around 16 and not have a bunch of other players get sick between now and them going to Orlando, get them there, continue to test every day, maybe add some testing in for the Walt Disney World cast members, then I think this is something that could happen for the NBA. There are going to be more. A lot more than 16 more. It's going to happen. But I think that's a pretty good start for the NBA to keep this under wraps. But I think that's all we have today. I really appreciate you guys coming and watching on YouTube. Sorry for the connection issues that we weren't able to do this live over at 110sportsmedia.com/live or on twitch.tv on the JMULL Show channel. But appreciate you all pushing through it with me. Have a great weekend. I'll see you back here on Monday. Monday the 30th of, I believe it's the 30th, no, excuse me, Monday the 29th of June for the JMULL Show, another week, and I can't wait for it to get started. But if you've been watching the JMULL Show, subscribe to the YouTube channel down below, and we'll see you on Monday.